conclusion is clear. I don't want to set up a company because I have to pay this many taxes that I don't have to pay. And also, you have to form a company. You have the cost for that. And you have to keep a bookkeeper, an accountant to run that company every year. What do I gain by forming a company? And the answer is nothing.
When buying a property in Spain, many buyers and investors, they ask themselves the question, should I buy the property in my own personal name, or should I set up a company and then buy the property with our company? Well, it really depends, and taxes may vary and the practicalities are different. Today, we're joined by our good friend and property lawyer expert Miguel Manzanares, and we're gonna dive deep, and by the end of this video, trust me, you'll be an expert. Miguel, welcome back to the iHomes channel.
Thank you very much.
So Miguel, we've invited you on here today because we wanted to talk about sort of the structure of buying a property in Spain. So, in other parts of the world, a lot of our clients are from all over, right? So we have clients from the US, North America, Canada, we have clients from, all the way Middle East, Southeast Asia. And in different countries, it's quite normal sometimes to buy, properties with company structures and so on. So we get this question asked quite a bit, and we thought that we could just jump on here and have a quick chat about, what it really entails to buy a property personally or buying it through a company. So my first question to you, Miguel, is what's the main difference? I mean, let's start with buying personally in a company. How do you advise clients?
Well, there is no common global advice that is really adapting to every family and every circumstance. So every single case has got to be analyzed differently. And when we have that kind of dilemma, we have to ask a few questions to that person to better understanding what's the intention about that property, because it's very different when someone wants to keep and enjoy that property for themselves and then when someone buys that property with the only intention of renting that out and not using for personal use. So these are different scenarios, and consequently we have to give different advices and different conclusions, right? I would say that when someone buys a property, and this is really something that I offer to do it before, even before coming over still, or before deciding about one specific property, this kind of conclusion can be given and in place before the client is even traveling to Spain. I would say we have to face different scenarios. First of all, you have to buy a property and you've got to analyze what kind of taxes you have to pay when the acquisition of that property. In that sense, I have to say that same taxes are applicable when the buyer is a private person or when the buyer is a company. So it doesn't make any difference. Someone is coming over expecting that building up a company because the transfer tax in case of resale or the VAT in case of a new property is going to be mitigated with one formula or the other. That's not the case at all. We have same level of taxes when someone buys in a private individual name or in a company's name. That is the same. But the cost of keeping that property could be very different, because if the owner is a private individual, as such, you can use and enjoy the property as much time as you like. You don't need to pay any taxes. You have to pay what is called, badly called under my point of view, the non-resident tax. And I say this because it looks like every non-resident pays taxes and the residents or Spanish people, they do not pay taxes. That's not the case. This should be named correctly imputed income tax. And the imputed income tax is a tax that you pay for the maintenance of that property, for the kind of capital growth of the property, if you like, that you calculate an imputed income of a property at a rate of 1.1% of the cadastral value. Every property in Spain has a cadastral value. The cadastral value is used for several purposes, to pay the council tax, the EB. So this cadastral value that doesn't have to match the market value, normally in fact is lower, is the base for you to calculate at 1.1% the imputed income. So let's say a property that you paid 400,000 euros, very likely the cadastral value is going to be around 300,000. 300,000 at 1.1%, that is 3,300 euro. This is the imputed income. And from that, you will pay the corresponding tax rate at, let's say, a non-resident pays 19%. Sorry, a non-Spanish person will pay 19%. Spanish person could pay even more, actually. So that is the imputed income tax. That's everything you got to pay if you become owner of that property on a personal level.
So practically 90% of the 3,300, which is, barely 600 and something euros.
Exactly. So in that example of a property that you paid around 400,000 euros, you pay around 600, 700. Of course, I cannot precisely say what is the cadastral value. We have to see case by case the EB.
Yeah.
At the EB, you have a space of cadastral value. You got it, multiplied by 1.1%, and then after that, the result by 19%. That's everything you got to pay if you keep the property in your personal name. This is the imputed income tax. That is if you keep it in a personal name. But let's suppose that very same property is in a company name. When a company in Spain, that's important. A company is a different personality. It's a different entity. Your company could be looking like this is me, but it's not from a legal point of view. You are you, and the company has independent legal personality. And as such, that company should be, if that company is accepting that shareholders or company directors are using the property free, you should be declaring the rental, the imputed rental income. And what is that? That is really what that property, if that will be rented out to third parties, you will have a rental income. But that is not really making an income, because there is no real tenant that pays every rental. Is that the company directors and the shareholders are using free a property that should produce a market value income.
Makes total sense.
And therefore the taxman will say, okay, fine, fair enough. How much would be typically an income of that rental? And you can go to Airbnb, booking.com, and many other portals by which you can calculate very easily how much is the rental value of that property. And you calculate, okay, this is making 5,000 a month, multiplied by 12 months is 60,000 a year. At 60,000 a year, that company would have to pay corporation tax as 25%. So we, all of a sudden, that we are using that property, or we can say directors and shareholders are using free the property, that company, fair enough, that doesn't charge anything to directors and shareholders, but at least should be reporting to the tax authorities the market value of that rental every year, which in this example, let's say the market value is 5,000 euros a month, multiplied by 12, 60,000 a year. So that company should be reporting an income of 60,000 a year, and in consequence, 25% corporation tax, which is 15,000 euros. So that is the example. So if you keep that property for yourself, you pay only imputed income tax, those 600, 700 a year. If you keep that property under the name of the company, you should be reporting like the imputed rental income. That is 15,000 euros. So we show this to the client and say, okay, you make up your decision. If you keep it in your personal name, you just pay the imputed income, or the company should be paying 15,000 euros. The conclusion is clear. I don't want to set up a company because I have to pay this many taxes that I don't have to pay. And also you have to form a company, which is, you have the cost for that. And you have to keep a bookkeeper, an accountant to run that company every year. And what is the benefit in return? What do I gain by forming a company? And the answer is nothing. Nothing. Because if by having a company you would say, okay, I pay no inheritance tax, and with the private individual I do have to pay inheritance tax. That's not the case, because as a private individual, if you leave the property to a spouse, children, first million free of taxes. After the first million, the tax bill 99% exempt. So your family members will not have to pay anything at all as in the inheritance. And you will say, okay, but do I avoid the wealth tax? Not at all, because you have no wealth tax either with this property that in Andalucía, you have per person 3.7 million euro. So you realize that you have formed a company because you have heard, you understood, you misunderstood that by forming a company you mitigate taxes, but those taxes are already zero. The inheritance tax as an individual, it will be zero. The wealth tax as an individual will be zero.
Yeah.
Why having a company? What is the benefit of having a company? You end up having to pay the imputed rental income of that corporation that has to report market value rentals because of permitting the free use for directors and company directors, and in return you get nothing, right? So therefore, going to this example, you see like there is no point of forming a company and keeping a company alive for keeping the ownership of a property when you get nothing in return, but the contrary, you have to pay taxes. Then, of course, this is not the case for everybody. So if you say, okay, but now the property that I'm thinking is not 400,000 euros, but 7 million euro. Okay, so therefore, now this is really a key point in which you have to say, okay.
Is that how you sort of guide your clients?
Of course,
is by value, right? So when you get to a certain value, it might be worth it. Is that what you?
The value is a very important point to be considered, because depending on the value, you activate or not the wealth tax. Depending on the value, you also have to face inheritance tax, but that will really depend on the number of family members that you want to leave the property to and the number of other things. And also the use, because if some people say, Miguel, I want to rent it out completely and I want tax efficiency, I'm not going to use it for myself. I'm not setting up a company to own a property and I'm going to use the property myself, my family, and that's it. No, I will not really go to the property maybe a couple of weeks a year or 3 weeks a year if I could, but normally my intention is purely renting out the property. Okay, and then therefore we have to compare a number of things. What it would be the taxation for a private individual or the taxation with the company. That is, and I'm gonna link it to another interesting controverted matter. This is typically an American person, UK individual, they said, I wanna rent it out completely, the full year, and what do? Form a company or keeping under my personal name. Taxation up until recently, 25th of July, was very clear. If you rent out the property in a personal name, you had to pay 24% of gross incomes.
Without deductions?
No deductions permitted whatsoever. Or the company 25%, but you can deduct everything. So if I was really in a meeting with a client before the 25th of July, I would say, listen, if you form a company and you want to rent it out, then it's better to form a company. You can deduct everything and you pay 25%. Otherwise, you're going to pay 24% of gross incomes with no deductions. But now, after this resolution came in force recently, very recently, just July, and we are today on the 29th of September, then the expenses are deductible. So you see, do I form a company and pay 25% of net incomes, or do I keep it in my personal name and I pay 24% of also net incomes, deducting everything? So now the conclusion is clear. Keep it in your personal name. Don't set up a company. Don't spend the money forming a company. Don't spend the money every year with an accountant, with maintaining a company.
Yeah, I mean, it all adds up. You know, an accountant in Spain is anywhere between 250, 300 euros a month, and the declaraciones trimestrales that you have to do, the headache of presenting accounts. It's also a very big part of it, right? Just having a company is not just having a company. You need to effectively run the business and do these declarations with your accountant or bookkeeper, right?
Yeah, in fact, actually, in the very most of the cases, keeping a property in a personal name
is easy.
Is much easier and much tax efficient than keeping a property in a company, because the company will have to, if you are using the property, the company will have to report incomes that it doesn't have, honestly. So the company is just permitting you to use the property, and but there is a value of that gift that the company is giving to you. The company is permitting you at market value, is giving you 50,000 a year, or maybe 10,000 a month, or that depends on the kind of property that we are talking about, right? But that kind of a gift that the company is doing to you via permitting a free use of a property that is worth at market value 10,000 a month, 5,000 a month, whatever it is, that is got to be reported by the company as an income. And that is normally the killing factor. That is the element that is making to consider that it's not worth it to form and maintain a company and pay the imputed rental income of that company, because on the other side, you can keep it in the personal name and you pay zero.
So would your sort of, conclusion be, it depends on value and it depends on, your end goal? That would be the conclusion, right? So there's no right or wrong. It really depends on the situation.
Exactly. In the very most of the cases, because we are not talking, the majority of properties that are being sold are not above 10 million euro, exactly. Are below 10 million euro. That's really a case. That's very, very easy to have that conclusion, right? So therefore, because the prices and the value of the properties are below 5, 7, 8 million euro, and because of many people are willing to come to this region of Spain to not just to have the property that is producing, but also to enjoy. So the conclusion in most of the cases is that keeping in a personal name is much more advantageous than keeping in a corporate name. But there is no global answer. There is no receta maestra. We can say that's really like the recipe is not the same for everyone. So we got to listen the client. We got to learn what the price they're considering. We got to analyze as well how many members of the family is and a number of consequences, and advise which is the best way to become owner of the property in a personal name, with maybe a little bit of a mortgage, or not, dividing the value of the property in between different co-owners or a company. So we got to analyze it. But we are very happy to analyze this situation case by case before even coming over to Spain. Once in the beginning of the process, so if they don't want to make that kind of complex analysis that early, fair enough. We can also do it once they decide to buy a property. In the very early stage of reservation, we can discuss that in our meeting, in our office. We can also discuss that after the property has been taken off the market with the reservation, to think the best way to adequate the ownership of that property before signing the PPC, the private purchase contract.
Amazing. So it's do your homework and speak to a local specialist before you make a move.
Yes, that's really the way in which you can prepare yourself, your family, to have a very cost-effective way of becoming owner of that property, and not necessarily overspending money in taxes, that just because of really choosing a formula that you heard of and without really a proper thorough analysis.
That's an amazing breakdown, Miguel. So I think that's a perfect wrap. And actually, just on this point, I'll just remind our audience that everything we're talking about today is focused in Andalucía. So it might be the case that you're looking to buy elsewhere in Spain. And if that's the case, tax brackets that we mentioned in this video might be applicable, might be different rates in other parts of Spain. Miguel, I think that's a perfect wrap to this video. So thanks again for joining us on the High Homes channel. And for you guys watching this video, if you're new to this space, obviously press that button, don't be shy, subscribe to the High Homes YouTube channel so you can stay posted with everything regarding Spanish property news, real estate in Spain. And we hope you liked this video. So if you did, please press that button, like the video, so we know that the content is right on track. And if you have any questions or comments about companies in Spain, buying in personal names, or whatever question you might have, question, ask that below in our comment section, and we'll make sure to ask Miguel and ourselves. We'll get back to you. And I think that's a perfect wrap. Miguel,
thank you so much.
Let's say bye to them. Ciao,
Adios,
ciao.
gracias.